Ladies and gentlemen, we have a new HHS Secretary. News to you? It was kind of news to me. I knew he'd been nominated, but boy, I turn around and the Senate confirmed him 55 to 43. His name is Alex Azar. Randy Barrett is a writer with the what should we call it? Investigative reporting, new investigative reporting, a site called tarbell.org. Hi, Randy. It's good to see you.
Happy to be here.
Thanks for coming in.
Sure.
Alex Azar, he's from the Eastern Shore, right? From Salisbury, Maryland.
Yeah, he's a local from a D.C. standpoint.
That's all I know about him.
That's all you know about him.
Yeah.
Well,
how did he get this job? Where did he come from? And what's the story?
He is a lawyer by training. He spent during the George W. Bush administration, he worked at HHS as an undersecretary. He has really more recently than that, he has been working in the drug industry. And that is probably the most controversial thing about him, is that he is the first HHS secretary to come from the drug industry.
So he's a big pharma guy, is he?
He is a big pharma guy. He was president of the Eli Lilly Corporation's U.S. division.
Right.
Up until recently.
Right. Doesn't this follow the pattern of Donald Trump of picking people who are sort of the antagonist to the agency to now lead the agency?
Well, in some respects, you can say that. The main concern about him from critics is that he is too close to the industry, and it gives the industry a very powerful advocate in the nation's most powerful healthcare policy position. And so we're hearing a lot from groups like Public Citizen, who have complained that under Azar's tenure at Lilly, he raised the price, for example, of insulin 3 times, and there were many other drugs. Of course, the drug price problem has been getting worse and worse. And under his tenure at Lilly, it continued to get worse at Lilly as it has at other major pharmaceutical corporations.
But did any of these issues come out at his confirmation hearing?
Well, they all did. He's very smooth. He's a very capable guy from everybody's description of him. He certainly knows what he's doing. In one respect, you can say he's a perfect candidate for the job. But if you look at the other side, where they say, look, this is a guy that was in the drug industry. He did nothing about drug prices. In fact, they went up during his tenure. It was brought up several times at the hearing, and he basically said, yeah, drug prices are too high. I want to work on that. That's basically what he said.
Which was a
Right.
nice political answer.
Right. It's a very good political answer. He is not, several options were offered for him. Well, how about to let the government negotiate Medicare Part D? He said, no, we really shouldn't be doing that, which is classic pharma.
Right.
So the pharma really doesn't want the government negotiating drug prices at all.
Well, this whole issue of prescription drug prices, we've been over it so many times. I mean, that you can get the same drugs at half the price or less in Canada or in Europe or in Mexico. And
Right.
Number one, we cannot import legally from those countries, correct?
Correct.
Still.
That is.
And the other is that the United States government, Medicare, Social Security, or I guess Medicare, Medicaid, are the largest purchaser of prescription drugs, and yet we cannot negotiate lower prices.
That was written into the 2003 Medicare law that we couldn't do that. And so there's a lot of people that really believe the United States should be able to do that.
Of course.
So that's something the drug industry, of course, does not want. Really, the drug industry has been very, very capable at really slanting the playing field. So they've blocked foreign importation. They've blocked the government's ability to negotiate on Medicare drugs. Now, incidentally, the VA can negotiate and does get good pricing, but it's Medicare and that's the big enchilada, that the drug industry does not want the U.S. government to have negotiating power.
So the veterans, I didn't realize that. The Veterans Administration can.
They can.
And obviously.
And the military does as well.
And the military. Mm-hmm. And it's working for them, right?
It works for them and saves them, I think, on average, 25%. So it's something that already happens, but the drug industry was very careful that it did not want it to happen in the Medicare
And
space.
The pharmaceutical industry is surviving. Despite having to pay this 25% discount.
Exactly, it's still surviving, doing just fine.
I mean, it's insane. I have a new book coming out, and I'm talking right now with bookstores and publishers. And if you buy more than one book, right?
Right.
You get up
You
to
get a
like
break.
20 books or 25 books,
Right.
they give you a break, right?
Right.
It's almost like anything.
Right. So in the drug industry, so they've very carefully, historically, and not just recently, but made it very, very carefully pushed to close the U.S. market and to make sure they have basically monopoly power over it.
So this is, to me, really, and that's why I was happy you were able to come in and tell us about it. This is a classic case of the fox in charge of the hen house.
Well, the critics would say that, and I think with pretty good reason. Azar is a company man and has been for many years. And they also point out that Scott Gottlieb, the head of the FDA, is also a company man. He has a long-standing ties to the drug industry. So you've got the two highest healthcare positions being held by former pharmaceutical industry people.
Right. Well, you think about you think about the agencies. Okay, well, businesses should have some representation too, and corporations. Well, you got the Commerce Department, right? I mean, that's their job, as I see it. HHS, Health and Human Services, is supposed to be out there fighting for the consumers, fighting for people who need health care. I mean, this is the way Kathleen Sebelius was in charge of the Affordable Care Act implementation. It all came through HHS.
Right.
So what does Azar say about the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare?
Well, he's very much against it.
Of course.
So he's a good conservative. He's a good conservative.
He wouldn't get the job
right.
if he
and he's
not.
also for Medicaid block grants, which would give monies directly to the states.
Which would end Medicaid as we know it.
Which many people say would end this program as we know it. So he's very much on the script of the conservative Republicans in that respect.
How did he get the job? I mean, how did he get a 55 to 43 vote in the Senate?
My feeling about it is, if you look at his qualifications, he is qualified for the job. I mean,
he's qualified to run an operation because he ran a drug company.
Right, and he also worked at HHS as an undersecretary for I think 5 or 6 years. So he's a guy that if you look at him on paper, I mean, this is a guy that can do the job, and I think that's probably what did it.
But not his position on the issues.
Not definitely for critics, his position on the other issues is a real problem.
Well, yeah. So what's interesting to me, what's kind of contradictory about that is, were he, for example, nominated for the Supreme Court, right?
Right.
Okay, they would say he's been a judge. Let's say came from the federal bench. People would say, okay, he's qualified for the job. Yeah, he's been a judge.
Right.
He's heard cases. He's decided cases. He's written briefs, right? But they wouldn't be talking about that. They'd be focusing on where he stood on the important issues that might come before the court.
Right. And
so this guy, he's qualified, meaning, he can walk, he can talk, he can sit at a desk, he can make phone calls, he can make decisions, but he's going to make bad decisions, and they're, in my judgment, and they're not looking at the key issues like what's going to happen to Medicaid, what's going to happen to Obamacare, what's going to happen to the price of drugs, and holding him responsible for his position. And he brings that big business, anti-consumer theology, if you will, or philosophy or attitude, policy about drugs to the job.
Well, he does, and if you're talking about draining the swamp, this certainly isn't a move to do that. And as I think we've seen with many other Trump, appointees, these are people who are industry people. These are Washington animals ultimately.
Right.
So there's no change here. What's happening now really is, and it's something we watch very closely at Tarbell, is the continued corporatization of our government and our democracy. And that's what we do at Tarbell, is we really are looking into how those special interests apply their power and to what outcome. And it's something that's happened for years and is simply in overdrive with the Trump administration.
Right. We've seen that in other cases too, where most recently the leader, the head of the largest coal company, Murphy Coal, I think, or whatever it is, who basically wrote the administration's energy policy, and gave them a whole list of things you got to do to help the coal industry, and that's what Trump has done. Followed the line again. The corporatization, if you call it that.
It really is a corporatization of the process. And again, this is something that's been going on for years in Washington. It's not new, but it's certainly gotten worse under Trump. And it's something that I think is a country we need to be concerned about, deeply concerned about.
You might call it the Goldman Sachsization or something.
I think so. And you look at his cabinet, and it's just the influence of corporations is now at the highest point I believe it's been probably at any point in American history, and far and away. It's just maybe going back to some of the railroad big monopolies, perhaps back to then when they had that kind of power. It's really we're heading in that direction.
And you see that also in the tax bill
Sure.
that the president signed.
Yeah, we're doing a piece looking at the winners of the tax bill, and you see the hedge funds and the energy companies and of course the developers, right? Real estate developers. And of course, big business that got the big tax break. So you see all, the fact is our campaign system is, of course, built around money. It's built around institutionalized bribery, which is the campaign finance system. And lo and behold, look what comes out the other end, which is a tax bill that's very, very friendly to corporations and business interests.
Yeah, extremely friendly on the surface and also permanent, right?
Right, sure.
Unlike any tax,
Right.
any minuscule tax break that the average American worker might have gotten,
Right.
which will disappear in a couple of years.
Right.
The corporate tax breaks are there
Right.
forever.
Right. And some would argue that's good. That's great for America and will create jobs. It may. We have to wait and see. But again, you look at that corporate influence has been they bought their congressmen and they got what they wanted.